Good afternoon, everyone. So for most businesses, this is an extremely uncertain time, which drives the question, why should I be using radio for my business? Well, the aim of this next session is to take a look at why it's important to continue advertising and to build your brand, leading on to the benefits that specifically using radio are going to bring. So at this time, the market isn't behaving as it normally would. You've got different sectors experiencing very different conditions. Some of you may have discovered that your businesses have thrived, whereas for others, it may have been more of a struggle. To call this last year a time of upheaval would be an understatement, but one study found that when people experience a significant life event, they're strongly more inclined to try a new brand. And certainly, if you think of some of the brands which have thrived this year, such as, say, Peloton, for example, that's really proved to be true. So certainly during the last year, along with making sure I personally never want to take another walk with my family again, I know I also had time on my hands to be trying new things and to explore new brands. Despite this, as an advertiser, it's natural to feel that during tough financial times, media budgets should be reined in. But in the long term, that's not going to be the most effective strategy. When we talk about long term, we're talking about brand building. Short-term strategies, on the other hand, focus more on immediate effects, such as driving this week's sales and inquiries. Evidence suggests, however, the importance of maintaining balance between long-term and short-term advertising objectives, with the optimum budget split being 60-40 in favour of long-term. So we know advertising is important, as well as maintaining a healthy balance between long and short-term strategies. But how can radio actually help? Well, what we know is that there are three important ingredients needed for successful long-term brand-building campaigns. Those are reach, emotion, and fame. But how does radio stack up against these? So reach, or what's basically a large audience, leads to long-term brand building. And as Lucy's already mentioned, radio is a reach medium, as 36 million are tuning in every week. So advertising that reaches as large an audience as possible is naturally far more effective at attempting to build deep, loyal relationships with existing customers. This chart demonstrates how brands which target the whole market achieve 3 times as many large business effects, and they include things like profits, sales, market share, as those that focus just on existing customers. So targeted audience targeting, while it's desirable for activation, and by activation I mean things like sales, is not a major driver of long-term success. Emotional response also builds long-term benefits. At the most basic level, radio makes people happy. Positive mood translates into engagement with ads, particularly when they resonate at an emotional level. So while TV might have some peaks with certain programmes, Radiocentre's Media and the Mood of the Nation study shows that at an overall average level, it had the least positive effect on mood. More importantly, from our perspective, the same study shows that listeners feel twice as happy when listening to the radio compared to when they're not consuming any media. And that's because radio editorial reflects the needs of listeners and it lifts their mood across the changing rhythms of their daily lives. So, as a listener in a focus group said, when you're having a bad day, radio can be cathartic. You turn it up and scream at it, and it really helps. Well, I, for one, certainly did that a lot while I was doing the homeschooling stage of lockdown. Okay, the final ingredient of brand building is fame. So again, something that radio can help a brand to achieve. Fame is the quality that helps brands bring to mind more readily. So really successful brands don't just get people thinking about them, they get people talking about them. And that buzz amplifies the effect of paid media spend and pushes budgets further. And radio can really help make your brand famous. So analysis of campaigns showed that 31% that use radio report very large fame effects. And that including radio as part of the mix significantly increases the chance of achieving this kind of brand fame by approximately 65% on average. However, one of the most important facets of long-term brand building is what's known as share of voice. And simply put, that's a brand's share of communication spend within that category. So, although not everyone struggled during this past year, as we've already acknowledged, we do know that brands who spent more on advertising media than their share of voice, and that's known as excess share of voice, benefits, especially during tough times. So if, as an example, we look back to the 2008 and 9 financial crisis, long-term media investment dropped by between 15 and 20%, whereas short-term investments, including digital media, increased by 20%. But during that crisis, what we did see is that brands who achieved excess share of voice of over 8% experienced market share growth that was 67% greater than they would have done during normal times. And that's why, really, hard times offer a very good opportunity for growing market share. To put that into context a bit more, £1 spent on radio generates higher share of voice than any other media. For example, in this case, in the shoe retailer category, £250,000 would buy 85% share of voice in radio, but only 16% in outdoor. And when you've got many competitors spending less during a recession, it's really the perfect time to deliver excess share of voice and look to build your brand. So this, in this case, is looking at a large level investment, but you'd be expecting to see the same sort of effect for a smaller one. So I've considered how radio can help build your brand, but it is also highly effective at delivering important short-term effects as well. So let's have a look at the short-term results that radio delivers and why. In the immediate term, radio is a highly cost-effective way of getting your message out to as many people as possible. So Radiocentre's re-evaluating media study shows that for every £1 spent, radio delivers at least twice as many ad impressions as any other medium. To be clear, ad impressions are the number of times an ad's been delivered. Econometrics evidence also demonstrates radio's ability to deliver on the bottom line. So that same study gave an evaluation of profits, return on investment, in which radio is second only to TV in paying back £1.61 profit for every £1 that you spend. So let's consider the reasons why radio is so powerful at delivering short-term results. Well, for another thing, it's got a unique ability to communicate with customers at relevant times. So as an example, this chart is particularly relevant to, say, grocery brands and shows that radio reaches 38% of people in the moment who are travelling car to the supermarket, probably to buy those groceries. So 13 times greater than the reach of the next largest content-led medium. We're also aware of the fact that 60% of shoppers haven't actually decided which brand to go for until they're actually standing in front of the shelf. So we can use radio to put brands in front of a potential customer. And if we continue that journey of radio listening to purchasing, a study from Shortterm showed that when in front of supermarket shelf displays, people were 11.3% more likely to be visually drawn to those brands they'd heard advertised on the radio. And you bear in mind that I've already said how many shoppers, 60%, haven't decided to buy. You add that information together and it's certainly significant. And finally, what can radio add to a campaign that's using other media? Well, radio gauges our ad effectiveness system, and we've used this to measure over 1,000 radio campaigns for metrics such as ad awareness, brand consideration, brand relevance, and trust. The Radio Gauge Predict tool is available on the Radiocentre website, and it allows you to use the database to predict and understand what radio will deliver for your marketing campaign. We can see here how adding radio to other media in a campaign significantly boosts ad awareness. So to summarise, really, if you can, continuing to advertise during a time which is tough is going to bring long-term benefits to your company. We also know that radio evokes extremely positive reactions in real time, and as a result, that can lead to immediate results for your brand. Adding radio to your communication strategy will benefit from effective return on investment as well as broad reach. And also, radio communicates with people at relevant times when they're receptive to messaging.